I spent a night in a haunted house and something followed me home. I never believed in ghosts until the night I decided to prove them wrong. My name is Emily Harper. I'm 24 and I write for a small but growing online blog about urban legends, haunted places, and unexplained phenomena. Most of my life, I've been a skeptic. Ghosts, demons, spirits, sure, they make great stories, but I never gave them much weight until Wellington Manor. I first heard about it at a cafe in downtown Portland. A couple of friends, Tyler and Cassie, were arguing about the scariest place they'd ever been. "You know Wellington Manor, right?" Tyler said, sipping his cold coffee. "Abandoned since the 30s, 3 deaths, 2 disappearances, and people still claim they see shadows moving inside at night." Cassie scoffed. "It's a rundown mansion in the middle of nowhere. Old houses make noises, people exaggerate. Classic ghost story." I leaned in, curious despite myself. "Wait, what do you mean by disappearances?" I asked. Tyler smirked. "Exactly what it sounds like. People go there for a dare or a thrill and some just vanish. No trace, some swear the place eats you alive. I'm not going near that place." Cassie laughed, shaking her head. "You're not serious, Tyler. You'd pee your pants the moment you saw a rat." I smiled. Something about the story pulled me in. Maybe it was my curiosity. Maybe it was my journalist brain. But I knew I had to see it for myself. "Actually," I said, trying to sound casual, "I think this could be a good feature for my blog. A night in Wellington Manor. We could document everything. Videos, audio, the whole deal. If there's nothing there, it'll make a great post debunking myths." Both of them paused, eyes wide. "You wouldn't actually spend a night there," Cassie said slowly. "Oh, I would," I replied, grinning. "If you're scared, you can come, or not." Tyler laughed, shaking his head. "You're insane. But okay, I dare you. Spend a night in that place and survive. If you make it, I don't know, pay for your coffee for a year. Challenge accepted." I didn't even think twice. I spent the next week preparing. I researched the mansion's history, collecting every old newspaper article, police report, and urban legend I could find. Wellington Manor was built in 1912 by Edwin Wellington, a wealthy industrialist. He and his family vanished in the late 1930s under mysterious circumstances. Rumor has it, the house was cursed. Some say Edwin was involved in occult practices, trying to bind souls within the walls. Over the decades, locals claim to see flickering lights, hear screams in the dead of night, and sometimes even glimpses of shadowy figures staring from broken windows. I didn't believe it. Not fully, but I knew enough to respect the potential danger. I packed carefully. A high-quality DSLR camera with night vision capabilities, a digital voice recorder, spare batteries, a flashlight, and a notebook for observations. I left my phone fully charged in my bag, although I doubted I'd have much signal in the rural stretch of Oregon where the manor sat. I also took a small first aid kit, just in case. The night arrived. It was colder than I expected for early October, with a thick fog rolling over the abandoned estate. The road to Wellington Manor was narrow and overgrown, flanked by towering, skeletal trees. I parked my car at the gravel lot a few hundred feet away and looked up at the house. Its silhouette loomed against the night sky, a skeletal frame of broken windows, peeling paint, and a sagging roof. The place had been empty for decades, yet it felt alive in a way I couldn't explain. I grabbed my gear and approached cautiously, the gravel crunched under my boots echoing unnaturally in the quiet night. When I reached the front doors, they hung crooked on rusty hinges. I pushed the main door slowly. It creaked and groaned, complaining about the years of neglect. Stepping inside, I was immediately hit by the smell of mold and decay. Dust particles floated in the weak beam of my flashlight, shimmering in the air like tiny ghosts themselves. I set up my equipment in the main hall, a grand space with cracked chandeliers, faded wallpaper, and broken furniture scattered around. The temperature dropped noticeably. My breath came out in shallow clouds. I shrugged it off as the cold and continued documenting. Hours passed. The first few felt mundane. I explored the parlor, the dining room, and the long corridor lined with portraits whose eyes seemed to follow me. My camera captured nothing unusual at first, but every now and then I would feel a sudden chill brush against my neck or hear a soft whisper, just beyond comprehension. I chalked it up to my imagination. But the house had other plans. Around midnight, things started happening. At first, it was subtle. The faint sound of footsteps upstairs when I was certain I was alone. A cold draft that moved against the flow of the air. A door in the hallway that swung open by itself. I froze. My logical brain was trying to explain it away. Wind, old hinges, creaky boards. But my gut screamed that something else was there. I followed the sound of soft knocking in the upstairs corridor. The stairs groaned under my weight. The hallway was darker than the rooms I had explored, the air heavier, almost suffocating. And then I saw it. A shadow flicker at the far end of the hall. My heart skipped a beat. I raised my camera and pointed it toward the movement. When I looked through the lens, it vanished. No trace. I whispered to myself, "It's nothing. It's nothing." Minutes later, I heard a soft, deliberate whisper. "Emily." I froze. My name, spoken clearly. I swung the flashlight toward the voice. Nothing. My pulse was racing. The rational part of me tried to say it was my own imagination, but I couldn't deny the feeling of being watched. Then objects started moving. A chair in the corner shifted slightly, a book fell from a shelf, and the chandelier above swayed despite the lack of wind. I grabbed my voice recorder and started documenting. "Something's here," I said into the recorder, my voice shaking. "I don't know what, but it's moving things." The whispers grew louder, fragmented, words I couldn't fully understand. Almost like a language I didn't know, but with clear malice in the tone. Shadows moved in the corners of my vision, never fully forming, never fully disappearing. I felt icy fingers graze my arm as I moved past the dining room. I was terrified, but, strangely, I was also compelled to continue. My journalist instincts overrode my fear. I had to capture this. Then came the worst moment. I was walking down the corridor when I saw it, standing in the doorway at the end of the hall. A figure, dark, indistinct, watching me. Its head tilted slightly as if studying me. My breath caught in my throat. I tried to move, but my feet felt rooted to the floor. The figure didn't move closer. It didn't retreat. It just watched. Panic surged. I turned and ran, heart hammering, shouting at myself to get out. I didn't care about the cameras or evidence anymore. I sprinted down the stairs and out the main door. The cold night air hit me like a wall, and I didn't stop running until I reached my car. I fumbled with the keys, hands trembling, and started the engine. My headlights cut through the fog, illuminating the path. As I drove away, I kept glancing in the rearview mirror. Something, or someone, was there, standing at the edge of the fog, watching me leave. I blinked and it was gone. By the time I reached my apartment in Portland, I was shaking uncontrollably. I told myself I was imagining things. It had to be over. I was safe. I unpacked my gear and reviewed the footage. Some of it was strange. Flickers of shadows, objects moving slightly, whispers faintly caught on the recorder. Nothing concrete, nothing terrifyingly clear. Just enough to make me question my sanity. And yet, as I turned off the lights and tried to sleep, I had the distinct feeling that I wasn't alone. Something had followed me. Something that wasn't done with me yet. I didn't know it then, but that night wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. I thought I left it behind, but that night, my apartment felt wrong, like someone was already there. Returning to normal life after Wellington Manor should have felt like a relief. I should have been able to laugh at my own bravado, shake off the adrenaline, and write a blog post that would amuse my readers. But when I walked through my apartment door that night, a sense of unease settled over me that I couldn't shake. At first, it was subtle. My keys were in the bowl by the door, but the spoon I had left on the counter during dinner was now on the kitchen table. Slight, almost insignificant, but my stomach nodded. I told myself it was just me being forgetful, exhausted after the drive home. The apartment smelled normal, coffee and candles, but it felt smaller, somehow, as if the shadows had thickened overnight. The first night, I tried to sleep. My body was exhausted, but my mind wouldn't quiet. Every creak, every distant sound from the hallway made me tense. Around 2 a.m., I thought I saw movement in the corner of my bedroom. I blinked, heart hammering, and it was gone. A trick of the light, a reflection from my street lamp outside, rational explanations. But the feeling stayed. Something was in the room with me, watching, waiting. The next morning, I found more evidence. A notebook I'd left open on the couch was now on the floor. My pens, arranged neatly in a cup, were scattered across the desk. Nothing huge, nothing that screamed danger, but I had spent the last decade as a meticulous, organized person. This was wrong, and I knew it. I started documenting everything. My camera caught subtle shifts in shadows that my eyes barely perceived. My voice recorder picked up soft, unintelligible murmurs I couldn't explain. And I began to research Wellington Manor's history more deeply, hoping that understanding the past might give me a clue about what was happening. The deeper I dug, the darker it became. Edwin Wellington, the original owner, had reportedly been obsessed with life after death. Letters suggested he had conducted occult rituals within the house, rituals that allegedly trapped souls inside the walls. Stories of his children disappearing, of his servants vanishing, and of unexplained screams in the night filled old newspaper archives. Some accounts were sensationalized, but the consistency of reports from the 1930s onward was disturbing. Every clue led back to Edwin, to the manor itself, and to some unseen presence lingering in the house. I thought it would end with that night. I was wrong. By the second week home, the occurrences escalated. Cold spots appeared in random places. My kitchen, my bedroom, even the bathroom. They weren't just drafts. The air felt thick as if something invisible pressed against me. I would feel a weight settle on my chest when I tried to sleep, suffocating in a way that made my heart race. Objects began moving more noticeably. My chair shifted. While I stepped away, drawers opened slightly on their own, and my journal, which I always kept closed, would be found open to random pages. I recorded every instance, desperate to capture evidence, to convince myself this wasn't just a mental breakdown. One night, I sat on my couch reviewing footage from my voice recorder. I thought I heard whispers in the audio, but every time I played it back, the voice seemed to come closer, clearer, louder. I paused, holding my breath. "Emily," it said, not a whisper this time, a deliberate, cold intonation, like it was testing me, teasing me. I jumped to my feet and checked the apartment, every corner, every shadow, and found nothing. My pulse was racing, my hands trembling, but the sense of being watched didn't fade. Sleep became impossible. Nights blurred together. The whispering voices, the cold spots, the subtle movements, they were all there, and then it became more aggressive. A thump at the door one night made me freeze, then another, louder. I couldn't ignore it. I grabbed my flashlight, aimed it down the hallway, and waited. Silence. My phone vibrated in my pocket. Text from a friend asking why I hadn't responded. I checked the screen and it was dead. I had charged it fully that morning. I moved closer to the door and heard it again. Thump, thump. Something was pacing on the other side, or pretending to. My hand hovered over the doorknob. I didn't want to open it. Part of me wanted to call for help, but I didn't know who could help me. What could anyone do against something like this? By the third week, the entity began to leave marks. A heavy book I kept on my shelf fell with a crash one evening, shattering my calm entirely. My chair tipped over while I was brushing my teeth. I heard a low groan from under my bed as I stood frozen. I was no longer documenting curiosities. I was documenting terror. Then came the worst night. I had tried to maintain some sense of routine. I kept my camera rolling, my recorder running, lights on, everything in place. Around 3:33 a.m., my digital clock flashing red, I awoke to the sound of breathing. Slow, deliberate, not my own. I froze. The air was cold, icy, crawling over my skin. My flashlight illuminated the room, but the shadows were thicker, darker than before, clinging to the corners. And then I saw it, a figure, dark, featureless, standing by my bedroom door. It wasn't a shadow, it wasn't a trick of the light, it was a presence, tall, looming, observing. My camera captured nothing. My flashlight flickered when I pointed it at the figure. The room was silent, except for that slow, deliberate breathing. I reached for my voice recorder. "Who are you?" I whispered. My voice shook. It responded, not verbally, but through the device. My own voice, or something mimicking it, crackled through in a distorted tone. "Emily, I'm here." The hair on my arm stood on end. I could feel it in my chest, an invisible weight pressing down, and the temperature dropped so suddenly I could see my breath. I stumbled back toward the bed. The figure didn't move, didn't blink, just watched. I fumbled with the recorder, desperately trying to capture audio evidence, and it spoke again louder. "You can't hide." I bolted from the room, recording in hand, and ran into the kitchen, hyperventilating. My apartment, once a sanctuary, had become a cage. I called a friend, but the line was dead. My texts went unanswered. The figure hadn't moved physically, but the sense of its presence was everywhere. For the first time, I questioned my sanity. I had always been logical, grounded, never superstitious. But there was no explanation for what I was experiencing. No logical argument could account for the whispers, the cold, the presence that seemed to follow me from room to room. Over the next few nights, the pattern repeated and escalated. Doors slammed, objects shifted with intent, and whispers grew into fragmented sentences. Sometimes I felt tugged toward certain rooms, compelled to look where I didn't want to. Sometimes the entity seemed playful, moving small items in a mocking imitation of human behavior. Other times, it was terrifying, threatening. I researched further into the manor's history, desperate for answers. Edwin Wellington's journals and newspaper archives suggested that the house itself was a trap, a container for restless spirits. The entity in my apartment was not random. It was tied to Wellington Manor. I had brought it home. The final realization hit me one night as I reviewed the audio recording from 3:33 a.m. The distorted voice said something new, something that froze me completely. "I followed you." I sat there, trembling, recording in hand, trying to comprehend it. This wasn't a prank, a coincidence, or my imagination. Whatever had been in Wellington Manor had chosen me, and it was not harmless. By dawn, I understood a truth I couldn't ignore. The entity was intelligent, patient, and malevolent. It had learned my habits, my fears. It was studying me, waiting for the right moment to act. And there was nothing I could do to escape it. Not in my apartment, not in Portland, not anywhere I thought I was safe. I didn't know then if I would survive this, but one thing was clear. My life had changed forever. The night I left Wellington Manor, thinking it was behind me, I brought something home. Something that wanted more than just to haunt a house. Something that wanted me. It doesn't just want to scare me, it wants me. By the time the third week rolled around, I knew that whatever had followed me home from Wellington Manor was no ordinary ghost. I had spent nights documenting subtle movements, cold spots, whispers, and glimpses of shadows. But now it was becoming intelligent, responsive, adaptive, relentless. I had no choice but to seek help. I reached out to someone I had met during my research on paranormal activity, Dr. Nathan Cole, a professor of parapsychology and a field investigator who had studied haunted houses for decades. "I've read your blog," he said when I met him at his office in downtown Portland. His glasses reflected the harsh, fluorescent lights. "And from what you're describing, Emily, you're dealing with a tethered entity, one that's not just confined to a location, it attached itself to you." "Attached itself?" I echoed, a chill crawling up my spine. "You mean it followed me home?" "Yes," he said calmly, though his eyes betrayed concern. "Some entities, under certain conditions, can attach to the living. They feed on fear, on attention. They can manipulate your environment, communicate, and, if you're not careful, cause real harm." I swallowed hard. "So, what do I do?" He leaned back, steepling his fingers. "You can't fight this alone. First, you have to understand it. Second, you have to set boundaries. Third, If necessary, you might have to return to the source. He paused. In your case, that's a Wellington Manor. My stomach dropped. I had hoped it wouldn't come to that, but hearing him say it aloud, it made sense. The entity wasn't bound to the house anymore. It was bound to me. When I returned home that night, my apartment already felt wrong. Shadows clung to corners like tar, lingering even under the streetlight filtering through my blinds. I noticed it immediately in the mirror by the hallway. My reflection wavered, like a broken video feed, and behind me, a dark silhouette appeared for the briefest instant before vanishing. My heart raced, but I forced myself to keep calm. I started recording everything, following Dr. Cole's instructions. Over the next few days, the manifestations escalated. It began to appear in photographs I took, images of my empty living room, my kitchen, even selfies taken in my bathroom. In each frame, a dark humanoid figure lurked in the background, featureless, yet unmistakably there. It would appear in different places, sometimes closer, sometimes peering around corners. I started taking multiple photos a day, hoping to anticipate its movement patterns. The audio recordings were worse. Sometimes my own voice would be distorted, whispering messages I didn't intend to say. Other times, deep, guttural tones I couldn't recognize echoed through the files. Emily, you cannot hide. I am here. Sleep became a nightmare. Not just insomnia, I experienced sleep paralysis nearly every night. I would wake unable to move, unable to scream, with the sense of a presence pressing down on me. Shadows would crawl along my bedroom walls. Whispers would hiss directly into my ears, and sometimes I would see its face, or rather the suggestion of a face. Dark hollows where eyes should be. A void for a mouth, a form that shouldn't exist in the natural world. I tried everything I could think of to fight it. Salt lines, protective symbols, chants from obscure texts I had found in my research. Each ritual seemed to work for a moment, giving me relief only for the entity to adapt. It began circumventing my barriers, attacking in new ways, exploiting weaknesses in my routine. I was losing control. My apartment, once a safe haven, had become a battlefield. Friends noticed the changes. Cassie stopped by one evening. Em, you're not sleeping, are you? She asked, eyes wide as she scanned the room. I was irritable, anxious, twitchy. My normally neat apartment was disheveled, paper scattered, candles burned low, salt lines disrupted. I'm fine, I muttered, but my voice betrayed me. Just, a lot of work, she frowned. Em, this isn't just stress, something's wrong. I can feel it. Her words hit me, because I had felt it too. An unshakable dread that had crept into every corner of my life. I was losing touch with reality, questioning every sound, every shadow, but worst of all, the entity was getting smarter. It knew my routines, my weaknesses, even my fears. One night, I noticed something new. My reflection in the hallway mirror didn't match me entirely. The figure behind me, a blur in earlier weeks, was now clearer. Featureless, humanoid, but terrifyingly precise. Its posture mirrored mine sometimes, almost mocking. And it smiled. Not a smile any human could make, but a distortion of the air, a curl in the shadows that made me recoil. I realized then that I could no longer fight it in my apartment. Every night it grew bolder. Knocks came in sequences, objects flew across rooms, lights flickered with malicious rhythm. I was trapped, and it knew it. Desperate for answers, I dug deeper into the history of Wellington Manor. I discovered a chilling pattern. People who spent the night there rarely returned the same. Some vanished entirely. Some were found wandering, insane, haunted by things that followed them home. Others, like me, brought the presence back with them, unknowingly tethering themselves to it. I wasn't the first, and I wouldn't be the last if I didn't act. Then came the night I confronted it directly. I had my cameras rolling, my recorder in hand, and I waited. My apartment was silent, suffocatingly so. I spoke aloud, voice trembling. I know you're here. Show yourself. The air thickened, shadows pooled in corners, the temperature plummeted, and then it appeared, full form, in my living room, just beyond the range of my flashlight. It was wrong. Its body stretched impossibly tall, arms long and thin, fingers curled unnaturally. Its face, if it could be called that, was a void, but somehow expressive, malicious, aware, calculating. I froze, my heart raced, yet my journalist instinct screamed to capture this. I raised my camera. Its form shimmered in the lens, distorted, flickering between solid and insubstantial. I could see it studying me, mimicking my posture, tilting its head like it was learning, adapting. You think you can trap me? It whispered. Or at least the voice seemed to come from inside my head. I am not bound by walls, or rituals, or fear. I am patient. I tried chanting, salt lines, symbols, anything I had learned, but it laughed. Or I thought it laughed. The sound was like metal scraping glass, sharp and unbearable. Each attempt made it bolder, moving faster, manifesting in places I hadn't even been aware of. For hours, the confrontation continued. I fled from room to room, trying to document, trying to survive, while it mocked me, tested me, pressed me against the limits of my fear. By the time dawn approached, I was trembling, exhausted. My apartment, a mess of overturned furniture and scattered candles. I realized the truth. I could not fight this alone. The entity was intelligent, malicious, and far beyond anything I had encountered. My apartment, my sanctuary, was no longer mine. I sat on the couch, shaking, reviewing footage and audio. The entity had left marks in every corner of my life. Images, recordings, even my own thoughts twisted. It had adapted to me, learned me, and it was growing stronger with every interaction. Dr. Cole's warning echoed in my mind. The source must be confronted. I had no choice. I would have to return to Wellington Manor, face it at the source. Only then could I hope to sever the connection, to stop it from destroying me entirely. And as I sat there, exhausted and terrified, I understood the depth of the horror I had unleashed. This was no longer about proving a myth or writing a story. This was about survival. I would go back. I would confront Wellington Manor itself, and I would do whatever it took to end this nightmare. But I knew, deep down, that nothing would ever be the same. The entity had marked me, followed me, and it was waiting, patient, intelligent, malevolent. It didn't just want to scare me. It wanted me. Facing it wasn't an option. It was the only way to survive. I had spent weeks trapped in my apartment by the entity I had brought home from Wellington Manor. It had tested me, tormented me, and taught me a terrifying truth. It wasn't just a presence. It was intelligent, adaptive, and patient. Every night it learned me, exploited my fears, and fed on my panic. There was no running, no hiding. My apartment, my friends, even daylight had failed to protect me. If I didn't confront it at the source, I feared I would never escape it. So I planned. Dr. Nathan Cole had given me guidance, protective charms, and ritual knowledge that could potentially contain or banish the entity. I packed meticulously. Talismans of protection, candles, salt, incense, my cameras, voice recorders, notebooks filled with observations and incantations. Every precaution I could take, I did. And yet, as I drove toward the mansion that night, a storm raged overhead, lightning splitting the sky, rain hammering the windshield. I couldn't shake the gnawing terror in my chest. The road to Wellington Manor was barely visible through the downpour. Trees bent under the wind, their branches clawing at the blackened sky. By the time I reached the gravel lot where I had parked weeks ago, the mansion loomed even larger, almost alive in the storm's shadows. Its broken windows glimmered faintly, as if acknowledging my return. I stepped out of the car, rain soaking through my jacket, and approached the main doors. I felt it immediately, the oppressive weight of the house, heavier than I remembered. The air vibrated, thick and cold, carrying whispers that seemed to come from every direction at once. Emily, Emily, they hissed, barely audible yet insistent. I pushed the doors open. The creak of the hinges echoed through the mansion like a scream. Inside, the familiar decay had deepened, wallpaper peeling in wide strips, floorboards warped and splintered, dust dancing in the candlelight I brought with me. But there was something else now. Something alive in the shadows. The room shifted unpredictably. A hallway that should have led to the dining room opened instead into a long corridor lined with portraits whose eyes glowed faintly in the stormlight. Furniture I remembered was rearranged, moved as if by invisible hands. The air was thick with anticipation, a tangible energy that pressed against my skin. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I knew running wouldn't help. Not this time. I moved slowly, recording everything, chanting the protective incantations Dr. Cole had taught me. Shadows flickered across the walls independently, darting from room to room with no source. Whispers in languages I didn't know tried to manipulate my mind, coaxing me into fear, doubt, and despair. I steadied myself, focusing on the ritual. I am protected. I am in control, I whispered, though my voice trembled. The climax came unexpectedly. In what had once been the main parlor, the air thickened and the shadows coalesced into a single, horrifying form. The entity itself, larger than any human, faceless yet expressive, dark tendrils of its being moving independently. It surged forward, testing the protective charms, probing for weaknesses in my defenses. I raised the talismans and chanted, repeating every step carefully, but it adapted instantly. Shadows snaked around the candles, extinguishing them, wrapping around the corners of the room, whispering my name. My camera flickered in my hand, capturing distortions that made the entity's form more grotesque with every second. And then I realized the truth. It wasn't just haunting me. It was tied to the Wellington family itself. Edwin Wellington had dabbled in rituals meant to trap and preserve souls. The entity had been bound to the manor, to the family, and now, in its hunger and cleverness, it had latched onto me. My presence had freed it, made it mobile, but the manor itself was still its anchor. To defeat it, I had to exploit that anchor. I moved quickly, lighting candles in a circle, pouring salt along the lines Dr. Cole had taught me. I recited incantations from his notes, the words strange and foreign on my tongue, each syllable an attempt to reclaim control. The entity lashed out, dark tendrils slashing through the air, brushing my arms and shoulders. Pain and cold seared through me, but I continued. I had no choice. It screamed, a sound not of this world. High-pitched and guttural simultaneously. The walls shivered. Dust and shadows swirled violently. My voice shook as I finished the final invocation, my entire body trembling. Then, silence. For a moment, nothing moved. The oppressive weight lifted slightly. I caught my breath, heart hammering, sweat and rain mixing on my skin. I looked around. Shadows recoiled, curling into corners, the form of the entity fading into a writhing darkness that seemed to dissolve back into the mansion itself. I had done it, or so I thought. Exhausted, soaked, and trembling, I stumbled toward the front doors. The storm outside had calmed slightly, the rain reduced to a soft drizzle. The mansion loomed behind me, silent and brooding. I didn't look back. I didn't dare. I had survived, temporarily contained what had followed me, but I knew the psychological scars would remain. I could still feel the imprint of its presence in my mind, lingering, a cold awareness at the edges of my perception. Driving back toward Portland, I couldn't shake the feeling that the entity was still watching. Perhaps it had retreated, bound once more to Wellington Manor, or perhaps it had learned something from our confrontation. I didn't know, and part of me feared that I would never truly be free. That night, when I finally reached my apartment, I unpacked my gear, set down my cameras, and collapsed into bed. Sleep came fitfully, haunted by fragmented shadows and whispers I couldn't fully remember. I woke repeatedly, expecting to see it at the foot of my bed, but the room was empty. For now, I realized something important. Courage and knowledge had saved me, but the entity was clever, patient, and powerful. I could survive, but I would never be the same. The terror I had faced, the things I had seen, had changed me irrevocably. As daylight broke, I stepped onto my balcony and looked toward the horizon. Wellington Manor was miles away, hidden in the misty hills, and yet, deep down, I knew I could feel it. A whisper at the edge of thought, a shadow in my mind that it wasn't gone. I had survived. I had faced it. I had contained it for now. But Wellington Manor, the entity, the darkness, it was still out there, and it was waiting. And somehow, I knew it would never stop watching. All right, that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed the story. We have so many more amazing stories coming your way, so make sure you hit that subscribe button. Our goal is to reach 100K subscribers by the end of this year, and we'd love for you to be part of this journey. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.